you informed. Now I'm joined by a media practitioner, that is Mr. Mnyaradzi. Just help us understand the landscape, the elections so far as we speak, how the coverage here has been like. Mr. Wengwere, good evening and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Fambi. How are you?
Now let's talk about the media. You are a media practitioner, generally looking at the coverage of these elections. What is your overall assessment of that?
I've just come from Shabani and I passed through Gweru, Kwekwe, and I think there's been a lot of interest around the elections. But I'm also must commend the understanding of the media that, you know, in the early parts of elections, there's a lot of excitement, but a recognition that you only can and should announce a result when it has been verified, stated, announced by the legally mandated body. And I can see early days, maybe not so, but increasingly the media seems to be playing its rightful role.
Now, talking about peace. Peace has been the message pre-election, during election, post-election has been the message so far from all the leaders, all the political players have been talking about peace. When you look at these elections, are they any different in terms of the peaceful manner they are being held, or is the same story? What is your assessment of a peace as far as the 23 August elections are concerned?
From 2 points of view, I was in Shewan, like I told you, and I went to Mberengwa. And what I saw is very peaceful, orderly conduct. Shewan itself, where the local authority outcome is now known, and people on both sides have seemingly embraced it. Gweru, Kwekwe, all the way to Harare. And also from the other side, I read one of the preliminary statements, and it says in 97% of the polling areas observed, these were very, very orderly and peaceful. And I think peace has been the prevailing order around the country.
Talking of the media and obviously its role that it plays during times like these, there is now the advent of social media, which I think is developing day by day. How do you assess and how do you look at the role of social media in these elections? Is it negatively or positively impacting the general outcome of the election?
I think it's both. To the extent that anyone, an untrained journalist, so-called citizen journalist, professional journalist, can go on WhatsApp and type anything in their mind, and there's no one who is looking at them and saying, what you have typed, is it correct or not? The propensity of driving fake news is very high. So it then becomes incumbent upon professional journalists to make sure that I just don't take anything that I see on social media as a fact. I wait, I verify, and then I publish. So the responsibility to journalism within the context of social media has even become higher and greater under this context.
Quite on point there, but let's zero in more on the statements we've seen being published by the observers. What is your reaction to that? What is your reading of these statements that has been released earlier on?
I looked at them very closely, and I noticed that most of them, if not all of them, are saying preliminary statement. And I looked particularly at the SADC one. I looked at the end, and it says, please note something to that effect. This is not a conclusive statement. We will provide our final statement. But again, if you look at within the statement, some of it were opinions, legal issues, some comparisons, and all that. And its length, it was voluminous, so to speak. So perhaps it was just a collation of different opinions from stakeholders and not the final view of how elections are perceived to have gone. So for now, I think let's take them as what they are, preliminary and not conclusive. But I'm hoping as well, because you are supposed, in my view, to provide some oversight of sort of an election, perhaps opinions less and much more factual matters of this what happens. For instance, I noticed 97% of polling areas observed were peaceful and without any negative incidents. I think that's a matter of fact, isn't it? Is it possible that we can have statements that focus on fact? What is the fact? And we move away from opinions, because opinions will make an already charged electoral environment much more charged. So I think, it's particularly for bodies such as SADC, less opinions, more facts would help.
Earlier on, you mentioned the importance of peace. We've seen a peace prevailing in this electoral period. What do you think needs to be done going forward? What has been done by the country to maintain this peaceful environment, and what are some of the ingredients that should be maintained to ensure that this period will sail through without seeing any violence?
I think it's an understanding that we are different. Someone will support this party, someone will support this person, and all that, but that does not make them less Zimbabwean. And I think once there's an acceptance that we vote differently, we choose differently, but that does not make me any less of a Zimbabwean than the other, then you find that we embrace each other more. But we must also be cognizant of the fact that the results are still being announced. And therefore, my sense is that that understanding that in our diversity we are one will also continue to prevail.
Now, when you look at this environment, you are a seasoned broadcaster yourself, a media practitioner, and you look at the Zimbabweans, what would you like to say to the media practitioners themselves, to the general Zimbabweans, in as far as these elections are concerned?
Less excitement, more facts. Because it's so easy. Because Zimbabweans have voted for their preferred candidates, and naturally there's some form of anxiety. You, as a media person, you need to understand that your role is to inform and advise. They are looking at you as a mediator between something that has happened where they don't have access and they need to know. So therefore, you need to take that responsibility seriously and avoid being excited all the time that you pick anything that has been said and you take it as a matter of fact. It has created problems, not just in Africa, but even in the US. Up to now, I noticed former President Trump and his adversary, President Biden, are still at each other's throat because of this context of social media. Remember, former President Trump was actually banned on now X, which is formerly Twitter, because of pronouncements. And a lot of the litigation that is going on now arose from those elections. So the media now, you are at the center of all these political dynamics. But you understand that you must be a trustworthy, objective, professional source of news. And you need to play that role diligently, professional.
Mr. Ungor, it is quite important we get to zero in on these issues because this is the biggest election. When you look at 5 years period, it's so much. They say that elections are more legal than logical. Many people tend to miss that. Can you explain in terms of what that statement implies when you look at the manner in which they are conducted? They are more legal than logical. Can you just expand on that?
I would say two things. I would say the voter is more emotional than legal. But the process, that emotion is exercised within a legal context. Within a legal context where certain things must be done in specific ways. And therefore, you need to understand that at the end of the day, despite my opinion, my emotion, it's like soccer. I mean, I'm an FC Platinum guy. You may be a Dynamos guy. But Islanders. We're playing Islanders over the weekend. But at the end of the day, we as fans, despite our invested emotions, we accept that the referee knows better than us, even if that decision may go against us. So we accept that the technical rules are the ones that will make this game a credible game, a game where we want to see. So the emotions that come from election, at the end of the day, must be contextualized within the legal frame that prevails. It's unfortunate that as human beings, we then don't take time to understand the legalities of it. Yeah. And the good thing about laws are never cast in stone. They're continuously evolving and the like. And therefore, if you find that something is not right or is missing, over time things can evolve. But within that specific time, there are laws. And without laws, then the emotions will take over. When emotions take over, we go into, we become instincts rule the world.
So how do we change that? How do you make Zimbabweans understand that they have to contain their emotions, they have to understand says they have to know the legality of the electoral process. What do we need to do to ensure that Zimbabweans do get to understand at that level?
Continuous voter education. It's just unfortunate that voter education is only then understood towards the election. But I think we need to figure out a way of getting Zimbabweans to take voter education seriously. Yeah, maybe 3 years, 2 years before elections. But the nature of every electoral process is that people get excited with elections maybe 2 months before those elections. And maybe we also need, as the electoral tempo goes up, we also need to significantly increase voter education. Yeah.
Well, if you're just joining us, we are coming to you live from HSCC, the Harare International Conference Center, which is the command center for the 2023 August elections that currently took place. And we are joined by Mr. Munyaradzi Wengweru, who is helping us to understand and unpack issues around the coverage of media, the legality of elections, and what needs to be done by Zimbabweans to maintain the peaceful environment. And you know that you have a role to play when it comes to maintaining peace during these elections. Now, Mr. Wengweru, when you talk of Zimbabwe as a peaceful nation, there's been so much. Elections have been held since 1980. Do you see the country progressing in terms of maintaining peace? Are we getting to better levels, or there is so much that needs to be done? Can you just explain in terms of that?
Definitely we're getting better level. I was in Shawan, in my hometown, and I saw members of the ruling party and opposition party crisscrossing each other. This one in their regalia, celebrating whoever the councillor would have won and the like. That, if you say, could it have taken place in 1980? What about 5 years later, 2008? If you were to draw a graph, it is evident that there's something among Zimbabweans. Zimbabweans are becoming much more tolerant of each other than we were before. I think that we must accept, including the fact that we can now banter, debate, online, offline, and I think that is showing a nation that is maturing. That is a fact.
So, talking of maturity, obviously people get to have opinions over how do we move forward, what do we need to do more. Looking at the peaceful environment we have, how do you enhance it? What do you do as a country?
You celebrate, Kota says in his theory of change, he says, you must celebrate small wins. It's an acceptance that any transformation is never an event. It's a process. And therefore, the key to making sure that you take hold of the good that you have come into your system is to acknowledge them. So we need to continue to acknowledge that, yes, I noticed that there are some deficiencies, and even Zeki itself have accepted that there were some administrative gaps that occurred. But at the same time, you then say, but overall, there are these things that have gone well. But I need to change in terms of these other things. So the first thing is celebrate your small wins. The second thing is identify the gaps and make a commitment to improving on those gaps.
That's peace. Media, we spoke about what in the past 5 years we've seen more players have come on board now. There are a number of media houses that are currently operating in Zimbabwe. In that end, how do the country continuously develop in terms of just having multiple voices within the media landscape?
I just hope more is better. I hope more is better. And I think the media as well has a responsibility to also understand themselves as a bloc. To say, as a bloc, we have a collective responsibility. Because if the bloc as well is too disunited, you'd find that it will be the other entities. I'm not saying that is what's happening. I'm saying if the media doesn't also define itself as a media bloc and define its professional standards, particularly given the growth of social media, the same quantity may become inimical to a better and a united Zimbabwe.
There's been so much talk around that after elections, you remain my brother, we remain neighbors, we remain relatives, and people need to understand that elections will come and go, and this period must not define how we are going to relate in the next 5 years. How do you get to read that, and how do you get to promote such tolerance within Zimbabwe?
I know of homes where the wife is ruling party and husband opposition. At the end, when the lights are off, they need to talk to each other. when the sun rises, they need to talk to the kids. Now you must now realize that your home environment, your son, your daughter, cannot, his life should never be disrupted simply because you're on Islanders and I'm on FC Platinum. These are football teams. These are political parties. What you're much more interested in is the life, your children's lives. So you need to be broader in your mindset. Because if you think elections take away the fact that you are Zimbabwean and you have a broader obligation beyond being divided by something that happens once in 5 years, then you're mistaken.
That's quite an interesting way to look at it, that even the wife and the husband. But what needs to be done to really ensure that that message is nationalized and people get to understand that elections will come and go? How do we nationalize the message and drill it in all Zimbabweans?
I will repeat it. Communicate, never stop communicating. It's unfortunate that, communication is defined as an exchange of meaning. You understand me, I understand you. And only at that point is communication. Does communication okay? So without meaning being equitable, getting to a point of equity in meaning, you will have discordance. And the way to communicate is to say, I say something, I allow you to say something, we try to establish feedback and see areas of gaps. And therefore, it can't be again. Communication can never be an event. Communication is a process. Communication is something which must then get feedback, and then there must be response. And the minute we see communication as the old-fashioned World War I sender receiver, where those that have gone to school, the so-called bullet theory, it's like a gun. You take a gun and you shoot, and you presume that simply because you have said something, someone has understood. You'll be realized you're speaking to yourself. Old back around, I think in the 70s, Paniva Adumeni, people go on radio and say, now I'm going to tell you how to grow vegetables. And they say, do this, do that, and all that. And after some time, they'll think that, the harvest is there. And they went into the field only to realize that, no, they were just speaking to themselves.
Well, of course, when you look at the involvement, it can never stop. Things will keep happening. More and more will be done. And when you look at Zimbabwe now, where I'm wondering, there is so much positivity that we have seen. But when it comes to understanding of the roles in areas like election, who does what, who announces result, to political players, do those aspiring candidates understand that this generality of it to say, what is my role in this election? How do I communicate? What do I do with people to maintain a peaceful environment throughout the election?
Yeah. You're right. You're bringing a different dimension. That is it just one body or is it everyone else? I think it's everyone else. It's in the interest of the political parties. It's in the interest of the media. It's in the interest of society. And I think we need to figure out a way whereby we empower different voices to align, to unite around a common message and say, if this is the standard of elections that we seek and we want, are you able to take this message to your constituents? Because sometimes if you talk to me, you give me a message to my people in Rushavani, maybe they'll listen to me, to my teams in Rushavani. But if I go to Hurungwe, they say, but Ndiani, this guy from Berengba, unutaure kuno Hurungwe. But a guy from Hurungwe would know better. So I think we need to figure out a way, maybe that's a lesson as well, that communication must be from multiple voices who are united around a common message. And then we need to empower them, and we need to provide resources to those parties to be able to communicate their message.
We have seen political players who have been explaining that one of the key elements when it comes to national development is inclusivity, ensuring that each and every Zimbabwean is involved. Talk to me about marginalized communities in Zimbabwe, those in rural areas, people with disabilities, women sometimes regarded as marginalized communities. How have they been made sure that they are part and parcel of this process we're talking about, the elections, in as far as 2023 is concerned?
I think we need to be honest, I'll be lying to say I've done a thorough analysis of that, but I think to be fair, we need to understand that marginalized communities matter. Without those communities, you don't have Zimbabwe. I always speak of I grew up at Mnene boarding school, and within that we had a school of the blind. And in my class, all the way to Form 4, some of the top 5 students were people who were blind. So once you don't tap into the intellect, the fact that you are blind does not mean you cannot be an engineer. You cannot be a medical doctor. You cannot be a scientist. You cannot vote. And therefore, if I exclude you, and perhaps you're the guy who is supposed to be the next Einstein, and because of that, you have limited the ability of Zimbabwe to move to the next level. I mean, these are, you're talking about, some are physical, some are mental, invisible disabilities and all that. But within that person, you find, I mean, we again, let me tell you about Eliud Mjaji, the Paralympic. Eliud Mjaji has the best record in terms of the Olympics, but yet he's disabled. Where I come from, one of the top sportscasters in this country, Obed is blind, but he's arguably one of the top sportscasters you have in the country. So we need to understand that. We need to move away from thinking simply because of eyes, I'm therefore smarter than the person who has no eyes.
Quite important as well, but also just to look at other aspects that have given us, talk of sport, talk of participation, but within elections, have these groups been incorporated to functional representation as they come also to the table to ensure that they do get to have maybe an equal share?
I think we need a thorough analysis of that. As of this point, I'm not sure. One can only hope so. One can only hope that because there's been a greater embracing of that process in the country, at least as we speak to each other, we've embraced each other. But in terms of the practical application, but I know the laws in the country have shifted to embrace people living with disabilities. But if the community has done the same, I'm not sure. Yeah, and I think we need to do that. We need to examine that and analyze that.
Certainly, there's need to examine more areas, especially when you look at elections, what has been done, where are we as a country, and how do we keep moving forward. Now, Chief, as we have this interview, I would love to understand from you. You are a media practitioner by profession. You have done all these things. Talk to me about some of the elements that you would say when you are asked to abide by the law, and sometimes being carried away by the frenzy of the elections, the atmosphere. How do you maintain that professionalism also to the media practitioners? Because now we do have, like you said, the so-called citizen journalist. How do you get to contain yourself and remain professional as you do your duty?
My friend Mbaya says the pressure of breaking stories is creating problems. The fear that if I don't break the story, my colleague will break the story. But what happens? You break the story. Look at what happened. We have a recent example. Hit streak. Professional media organization saw online that the man is dead. They went on, and all they needed to do is lift up a phone and call the family and say, we are seeing this online. Is he alive? And they've been told that yes, he is alive. And as I heard the mother, and I heard him, he said, very painful. I am not feeling well. Everyone knows that. I told you that I have cancer. But I told you I'm going for treatment. And psychologically, this harms me. But see what happens. Media organization, because they wanted to break the story, boom!
Quick to run with the story. Mr. Wengwera, I have to cut you short there, but quite an interesting discussion. I hope to continue with that. If you are just joining us, we are coming to you live from HIC, and I was just talking to Mr. Mnyaradzi Wengwera, who is a media practitioner by profession and also a broadcaster. Now, let's listen to Lusingo Sol, rather, one of our owners, speaking to Chief Elections Officer, Mr. Utlile Slaigwana.
manero akanaka muri yezimbabwe tinokugamuchirai zvakare tichikutendai kuramba muinesu pano paZBC News the Real African Voice apo tiri kukupakurirai zviri kuitika maererano nezvesarudzo silamukela njalo muri yezimbabwe namhlanje ntambama silibonga njalo lokuhlala lilati kamuri aswebo muchindi chonse nikuzwa mputhu akatarikira kuzosika suno kachitisiswini katwinkira ikunembo katkumwetera